Hello, buddy. Welcome back to the Tim Max Court channel. I'm your host, Jeffrey Tim Man Taylor. Today, I'm finishing off my Midnight Tales marathon for you guys. The first video I'm reacting to is 7 Most Disturbing True Road Trip Horror Stories. So, without further ado, I'm going to turn these lights off, move the camera up here for you guys, and let's get this reaction around the bag, shall we? Okay, here we go.
Back in 2010, I made the bold decision to move from New Orleans all the way up to Eugene, Oregon.
Okay.
I was 24 at the time, just me and my 2-year-old pit bull, crammed into this clunky 14-foot U-Haul filled with everything I owned. This was before I had a smartphone, just a basic flip phone with no GPS and a thick stack of printed MapQuest directions in the passenger seat. It wasn't exactly the best setup for navigating unfamiliar roads.
I can relate because sometimes my parents would like to print off directions to a certain place you wanted to go to, but now, since we got phones that have the GPS thing built in, we just ask it for the directions and then we follow it that way instead of trying to look at a map, because sometimes map roads look so small you don't know where you're at most of the time. But anyway, let's continue with this person's story. Let's see what happens next.
Especially since cell service vanished completely in parts of the desert for what felt like entire lifetimes. Still, I was excited and determined to make this cross-country trip on my own terms. Somewhere deep in central Texas, I realized I had made a bit of a miscalculation. My gas gauge was flirting with empty, and I hadn't seen another town, exit, or even a gas station for ages. Just as I was starting to panic and question my life decisions, this tiny little town popped up out of nowhere like a mirage. I didn't catch the name of it because I was too focused on getting to the pump before my truck sputtered out. It was one of those blink and you miss it places, maybe 6 streets total, barely any signs, and quiet in a way that didn't feel entirely normal.
Okay. This is why when you plan a trip, always carry extra fuel with you. Because if you start to run on low and you're out in the middle of nowhere that don't have no gas stations in sight, you'll be in big trouble. So if your car sputtered out because it ran out of gas and you're stuck in some place that you don't even know where it is on the map, fill your car up with that spare fuel you brought and go.
I filled up at the pump, never even went inside the building, and figured I'd be back on the highway in no time. Except, I couldn't find the way back to the highway. And I don't mean like I got turned around once or twice. I circled that entire town 4 times, each lap making me more irritated and confused. I could literally see the highway from certain spots in town, but every road I took either looped me back or dead-ended. Finally, I gave up and went into the gas station to ask someone, and that's when I met this lanky guy behind the counter. He had long, greasy black hair hanging in front of his face, and barely looked up from the magazine he was flipping through. He wasn't outwardly creepy, but something about him was just off. He spoke like I was wasting his time and gave me directions that made 0 sense. He told me to take some road that would get me back to the highway, but only after driving 17 miles out of town. I paused and said, "Wait, how is it 17 miles back? I didn't even drive that far to get here." But he just shrugged, mumbled something about the road curving around, still not looking me in the eye. I left that store with my gut in absolute knots. The second I hit the parking lot, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key into the ignition, and the moment I sat down in the truck, I just started crying. There wasn't any one thing that guy had done that screamed danger, but everything in me knew something was wrong. Whatever he wanted, whether it was the stuff in the back of my truck, or maybe something worse, I had no intention of finding out. The only problem was, he was the only person I'd seen in that town, and I had no idea how else I was going to get proper directions. That's when this beat-up red pickup rolled up to the station. The thing looked like it had been through several apocalypses, but the guy who stepped out was the living embodiment of a Texas stereotype. Big, broad flannel shirt, work boots, beard. I didn't hesitate. I ran up to him and asked if he knew how to get back to the highway, and maybe it was the desperation on my face, or the fact that I was near tears, but he immediately gave me a kind smile and said he could help. He told me there was a tricky little turnoff hidden just past a short concrete tunnel, a spot I'd passed a few times without noticing. Apparently, it tripped up travelers all the time because there were no proper signs, and it blended into the landscape. Then I asked him, out of curiosity, how far is it back to the highway? He chuckled and said, "Oh, maybe a quarter mile. See, you can almost spot it from here." My stomach dropped, so I told him the directions that the guy at the station had given me, and his whole face changed. He stared at me for a second, and then quietly asked how I even knew about that route. I told him the clerk gave it to me. He was quiet for a moment, then asked if I had a proper map. Unfortunately, I only had MapQuest printouts, which weren't helpful in this weird little place. He went back to his truck, pulled out a weathered old map of the area, and spread it out on the hood. He traced the route I'd been given, and sure enough, it veered away from the town, leading deep into nowhere. He told me that road led about 17 miles into the desert and just ended. Nothing there except a scattering of trailers, rusted out cars, and a small group of sketchy families who were known in the area for drug problems, and worse. That gas station guy? Apparently he lived out there. I'll never forget the way Texas, yeah, that's what I call him in my head, looked at me when he said I'd been smart to trust my instincts and not go down that road. To this day, I don't know exactly what that man's intentions were, but I know they weren't good. I was just a young woman alone with a truck full of stuff and no cell signal. And it still chills me to think how easily that story could have ended differently. But instead, I got lucky. I met a kind stranger with a rusty truck and a warm heart who helped me find my way. I never got his name, but I'll always remember him as Texas, my roadside angel in flannel.
Well, thank God somebody actually came around and knew how to get out of that town, because I'll be losing it too if I kept turning on different roads in that area and I end up back in the same town. But how in the world? I thought I was going towards the highway, but I ended up back here. But man, that gas station attendant, I'll be mad as hell if I found out that he was giving me directions to go to this abandoned desert area that has nothing but families that like to hit the drugs every now and then. That won't fly with me at all. But thank God that trucker came around and told that lady where to go. Because if he weren't there, she would have been lost and probably panicking nonstop. But man, if I got lost in another town, I'd be looking for like state patrol just to tell me how to get back on the highway to get to where I'm going. But that is scary for sure. Nobody don't want to get into that predicament.
This happened quite a few years back, maybe when I was around 20 or so. One of my best friends had invited me to tag along with his family on a little road trip that ended with a concert just across the border. The plan was pretty laid back: drive during the day, then pull into campsites at night and crash in their camper van. Nothing fancy, just good company, music, and a break from the usual routine. Our first night on the road, we hadn't even crossed the border yet when we rolled into a cozy little campground that sat right next to a beach. It had that calm, family vacation kind of vibe. RVs parked in neat rows, kids running around earlier in the day, and not a sketchy soul in sight.
Sounds like a fun place to camp at. But man, if I had like a mobile RV, I would like to drive it to a campsite myself. But also, you get to look at different sites while you're traveling. So, this person telling the story is pretty lucky that they got to get on a trip with a friend that has an RV.
So naturally, we all let our guard down without thinking twice about it. After dinner, while everyone was settling in for bed, I decided to step out for some air and clear my head. I've always loved being near the water, and since the camper was basically parked right next to the shoreline, I figured a quick walk wouldn't hurt. As I strolled down toward the beach, I passed this old wooden shack, one of those little storage buildings you see near the water. Didn't think anything of it at the time, just made a mental note of it in case I needed a landmark on the way back. I kicked off my shoes, stood where the waves could wash over my feet, and let myself zone out for a bit under the moonlight. Off in the distance, I saw a guy standing further down the beach. It was a public spot, so I didn't think much of it. Probably another camper out enjoying the quiet like me. Eventually, I figured it was time to head back, and that's when things started to feel off. That man who had been standing on the beach earlier, gone. But the weird part was when I got closer to the shack again. I could swear I saw someone trying to duck behind it, like they didn't want me to notice them. Instantly, my brain kicked into high alert. I didn't want to panic, but I also wasn't about to pretend everything was fine. I quickly called a friend I knew would be awake and started talking really loudly, dropping hints like, "Yeah, I see you. I'll meet you near the camper in 5." I gave that shack a huge amount of space as I kept walking, making sure whoever was there knew I wasn't clueless or alone. I made it back safely, locked the camper door behind me, and climbed into bed trying to shake off the unease. I didn't say anything to my friend or his family because, honestly, I figured it could have been something harmless.
Maybe, but I would have still told him because that is not normal for somebody to duck right behind the shed when you see him. And you never know, if you went around that area, they probably would have pounced on you and kidnapped you. And this person said earlier that the campsite did not have any weirdos around. Well, there's one hiding in plain sight. But man, that'd be creepy just to see while you're on the boardwalk near the beach.
Maybe a drunk tourist. Maybe someone just being weird. Either way, I pushed it out of my mind and enjoyed the rest of the trip like nothing happened. Fast forward about a year later, I was hanging out with that same friend, reminiscing about the trip, when that weird beach moment suddenly popped into my head. I casually brought it up, kind of laughing about how creeped out I'd been. But as I was talking, I noticed he got really quiet. Then he told me something I hadn't heard before. Apparently, a few months after the trip, his younger brother had mentioned something strange at breakfast one day. The same night I came back from the beach, his brother had woken up in the middle of the night to grab some water. As he passed by the camper's window, he saw a man standing right outside, staring in. The guy bolted as soon as he realized he'd been seen, but it definitely freaked him out. We both sat there in silence for a bit, realizing how much worse that night could have turned out. Whoever was hiding near the beach shack might have actually followed me back to the camper. I still don't know what he wanted, and honestly, I don't want to know. But it makes me really grateful I trusted my gut and didn't go back quietly that night. I think about it more than I'd like to admit.
That was a close call. Because you never know, that guy probably was planning on trying to figure out which camper you're staying in and sneak in quietly in the night when everybody's sleeping to either smuggle you out of there or rob you guys of your belongings. Who knows? But thankfully, the brother of this person's friend saw that guy looking through the window and he bolted away. But man, if I was the parent and one of the kids told me that somebody was following them outside, I'd be like, that's it, we're packing up and getting out of here quick. That would give me chills in my nightmares for sure.
So this happened a couple summers back when my boyfriend and I were heading home after a weekend camping trip, deep in the backcountry of British Columbia. We were on one of those long, bumpy forestry roads, like an hour or so from any paved highway. And since we'd camped out there plenty of times before, we knew the area pretty well. Usually the only people you run into that far out are either other campers in lifted trucks or guys driving logging rigs. It was a gorgeous day. Clear skies, warm air, that perfect summer afternoon glow. And we were just cruising along when we spotted this guy suddenly stepping out of the trees ahead of us and waving us down like it was an emergency. That instantly caught us off guard, because it's not every day you see someone appear from the woods in the middle of nowhere without any sign of a vehicle. We slowed the truck and came to a stop as my boyfriend rolled down the window to see what this guy wanted. He had on this thick flannel work jacket, which made no sense considering how warm it was, plus these dusty tan pants and beat-up boots. He had kind of wild, unkempt hair, big old glasses, and this pale, kind of gaunt face. He looked like someone you'd expect to see fixing a fence post, not walking out of the woods like a ghost. He told us his car battery had died and asked if we could give him a jump.
No, don't do it. He just walked out of the woods and he's wearing a red flannel jacket when it's hot outside and worn out looking boots. And something tells me that this guy might be either homeless, high on drugs, or he's just somebody trying to lure you out of your truck and steal the vehicle. I would feel bad, but I also tell him I don't have no jumper cables. I'm sorry. I'll call AAA if you want. And if he refuses that, then something's off. Oh man, this couple needs to be careful.
On the surface, it sounded like a reasonable request, but the way he spoke, it was slow and too calm, almost like he was reading a script. Definitely made both of us uneasy. Still, we try to be decent people, especially that far out where help is hard to come by. So we said we'd help. He mentioned his car was just a bit further up, down this side trail that was completely overgrown. As he started walking ahead, we followed behind in the truck, kind of joking to each other that this could totally be the start of a horror movie. But under the humor, we both were actually on edge. After maybe 150 meters down this tight, brush-covered path, we rolled into a small clearing we never would have seen if he hadn't shown us. Sure enough, there was a dusty old beige sedan parked there, way too delicate looking for those rough roads, with the trunk open and a blanket kind of tossed over the back like it was hiding something. The hood was already up, which was weird, but my boyfriend got out and grabbed the jumper cables while I quietly slid into the driver's seat, just in case. I didn't want to overreact, but something about the whole setup felt wrong. I even glanced around for anything I could grab as a weapon if I needed to. The guy kept talking to my boyfriend in this awkward, forced friendly tone, mentioning some buddy who had supposedly been fishing with him, but took off earlier, which didn't make a ton of sense. He just stood there while my boyfriend did all the work, like he was waiting for something. Eventually, my boyfriend had to remind him to get in his car and turn the key, which he did. And yeah, the engine started. He hopped back out and thanked us, but his tone was oddly intense, like he was trying really hard to act normal, but not quite pulling it off. My boyfriend didn't even bother properly putting the cables away. He just got in the truck, and as soon as he shut the door, I threw it in reverse and backed the heck out of there, with branches scraping along both sides of the truck. When we got back to the main road, I exhaled for the first time in what felt like forever. As we drove away, my boyfriend told me the guy had just stood there, silently watching us the entire time as we backed out. And sure, maybe he was just a weird dude with a dead battery and some social awkwardness. But neither of us saw any fishing gear near the car, and the whole thing felt too strange to be just a coincidence. I still get that pit in the stomach feeling when I think about how isolated that spot was. I honestly think the only reason nothing bad happened was because we both stayed sharp and didn't give him the chance to catch us off guard. Sometimes trusting your gut makes all the difference.
Well, thank God he got out of there quick enough. But yeah, that would throw me off too. If he did not have no fishing gear near him, why would he say that he was just out there fishing with a buddy, but his buddy left? That would be like a red flag warning sign right there. But man, if they were not paying attention to him, he probably would have sprang into action and attacked him. Probably would never been seen again. Like being kidnapped or either murdered. They're just lucky to be alive and get out of there, that's for sure.
This happened to me back in the fall of 2020, right in the middle of the whole pandemic craziness.
Okay.
My buddy, let's just call him Jay, and I were making a road trip from New York to Michigan to take care of some flooring jobs and maybe check out a couple houses we were thinking of flipping. We had loaded up his work truck, a sturdy Ford F-150, and decided we'd hit the road at night to beat the traffic and get there by morning. We were driving through Pennsylvania, and if you've ever been on those winding mountain highways out there, especially I-80, you know it's no joke. Just endless curves, narrow lanes, and steep drop-offs if you mess up. I was the one driving while Jay tried to get some sleep, and around midnight or so, I pulled into a service plaza to fill up and grab a few snacks. There weren't many people around, just one other car a few pumps over, a reddish SUV, maybe a Suzuki or something close. I didn't pay much attention, just noticed it, and moved on. Fast forward about 30 minutes, and I'm back on the highway doing a solid 90 in the left lane, when I see headlights creeping up behind us. At first, I didn't think twice about it, but after a few minutes, I realized it was the same SUV from the gas station, and something about that started to bother me.
You should be bothered because they're following you. They probably saw you coming into the gas station and figured, okay, we can follow to see where they're going and possibly try to pull them over and rob them. At that point, I would be hitting the gas and trying to turn off as many side roads as possibly can and try to lose them, but also try to look for a police officer and tell them what is happening, because you never know what sinister intentions person driving the other car has, and you don't want to find out.
To test a hunch, I slowed down to around 70, expecting the SUV to pass, but instead, it dropped speed right along with me. That's when I nudged Jay awake and told him I thought we were being followed. He perked up immediately. This guy used to be in the army, so he's wired to pick up on shady behavior fast. Without missing a beat, he says, "Yeah, I saw that guy at the gas station too. He gave you a weird look when you walked by him." Jay tells me to switch lanes, so I do, and the SUV switches right with me. Then he says, "All right, pull over. Let's see what he does." So I slow to a crawl and roll onto the shoulder. Sure enough, the guy actually stops behind us. At that point, Jay is like, "Yeah, this dude's got a gun or something. He's way too bold for this to be nothing." Jay tells me to punch it and go, and as I'm accelerating, he's rummaging through the cab, grabbing whatever could be used as a weapon. Hatchet, machete, a couple pocket knives. Nothing too crazy, but enough to put up a fight if it came down to it. Jay had this idea. He wanted me to brake check the guy, make him crash, and then we'd jump out with the blades and confront him. But honestly, the guy hadn't made a move yet, and I wasn't ready to escalate unless we had to. Instead, Jay grabs a big handheld spotlight from the back of the truck and opens the rear window. He aims it at the SUV and flips it on. We were hoping to catch a glimpse of the driver, but the front windows were tinted way too dark to see through. I swerved lanes and told Jay to hit him with the light again from the side. That time, for just a few seconds, we got a full look, and it was enough to give me chills. The guy looked off. He was tall, hunched over the wheel, had this weird, gaunt face that reminded me of Uncle Fester from the Addams Family, but with wild hair kind of like Kramer from Seinfeld. His expression was intense, like he was completely locked in on us. But once he realized we were both alert, that we saw his face, and that we weren't easy targets, he suddenly veered off at the next truck stop and disappeared. To this day, Jay and I still argue about what we should have done. He thinks the guy was a full-blown killer, maybe just cruising around looking for someone alone to pick off. Could have been a trucker sleeping in his cab who ended up being the unlucky one that night. Personally, I don't know exactly what that guy had planned, but I'm 100% sure it wasn't good. Whether it was robbery or worse, I'm just thankful we didn't stick around long enough to find out.
I'm glad you didn't either, because if you said he looked like Uncle Fester from the Addams Family and just kept on following you, then he might have was planning on either murdering you or holding you up at gunpoint to rob you. Now, that idea of pulling over and just going out there with your machetes to confront that guy ain't a bad idea, but you never know if that guy has a gun and then he might get out and start shooting at you. But of course, if he saw the machetes, he might end up bolting anyway. But that was a clever idea to pull out that high beam light and scare the crap out of him because he knows that they saw his face. But man, I still would have reported it to the police and told them where that guy was going and what the description of the car is, so he wouldn't go after nobody else. But thank God they were able to make it to where they needed to go safe and sound without him following them anymore. But man, that would be crazy as hell to experience, and it will make my blood pressure jump for sure.
A few years back, maybe 8 or 9 now, 2 of my close friends and I thought it'd be fun and cheap to take a Greyhound road trip from New York to New Orleans, just making stops in different cities along the way. We weren't rolling in money, so the plan was simple: ride the bus, crash at budget hotels, explore a bit, then hop on to the next spot. It sounded like an adventure, and for the most part, it was, until we hit Atlanta. That's when the trip suddenly stopped feeling like a vacation and started feeling like the beginning of a true crime documentary. We got to Atlanta late, probably around midnight, and after checking our maps, we saw that our hotel was only a few blocks away from the station. In our heads, that meant walking would be no big deal, and we didn't want to waste cash on a cab. Classic mistake. A driver near the entrance offered us a ride, but something about him was wrong, so we politely declined and set off on foot, 3 clearly out-of-place guys dragging rolling suitcases through a rough part of town, like we were asking to be robbed. Barely a minute into the walk, this woman who looked strung out started following us, talking fast and asking for money, offering a good time if we went with her. We tried brushing her off and sped up, but the situation just kept getting sketchier. A few steps later, we noticed 3 guys wearing bandanas trailing us, not saying anything, just staying behind us at a steady distance.
At that point, I would have took that guy's offer to ride in his cab, even though it does look shady, because I definitely do not want to run into no thugs wearing bandanas. You never know if they're part of gangs or they're not affiliated with anybody and they just want to catch up to you and rob you, or worse, murder you.
We stopped to adjust our luggage, and so did they. That was the moment my stomach tightened. We were being hunted, plain and simple. Right as things were escalating, the woman came back even more aggressive, still pushing the same weird deal. Thankfully, a massive bouncer from a nearby strip club saw the situation unfold and shouted at her to back off. Another guy, who clearly knew her, stepped in to argue with the bouncer, and things started to get loud. In the chaos, a security officer from the bus station must have caught sight of us because he came over and basically told us, "What the hell were you thinking walking around here at night?" He pointed out how we looked like walking targets, and yeah, he wasn't wrong. The security guy walked us back toward the station and told us to take a cab this time, no exceptions. The only problem? The same cab driver we had originally turned down was still parked out front, and the officer told him to take us. The second we got in the car, that uneasy feeling came rushing back. He took a weird route, hit the gas hard, and started mumbling to himself under his breath like he was having a conversation with someone who wasn't there. We noticed he locked all the doors with a button on the dash, and weren't sure if we were being kidnapped or just driven around by someone unhinged. We told him a couple of times that the hotel was in the other direction, but he ignored us. When he finally pulled up to the hotel, he stopped and just stared straight ahead for a moment, breathing hard. Then, without looking at us, he said in this calm but creepy voice, "Why didn't you get in the car earlier? Something wrong with the way I look?" It was clear he was pissed we rejected his offer at first. We tried to explain we just thought the walk would be quicker and didn't know the area well. We paid the fare, gave him a decent tip just to avoid any drama, and practically sprinted to the hotel doors. But before we made it inside, I turned back, and there he was, standing outside his car, just staring at us like we owed him something. No words, no movement, just that cold stare. Inside the hotel, things didn't get better. It was sketchy. We barricaded the door, and none of us slept more than an hour. We switched hotels the very next morning, and agreed that no matter where we go in the future, if it involves Atlanta or Greyhound, it's a hard pass from all of us.
Well, dadgummit. I thought they were in the clear for a second because the security officer helped them out back to the station. He didn't have to yell at them for doing something wrong. He just gave them a little light warning, but then I'm surprised the other cab driver that they refused earlier was still there. I'd be like, oh God, we got to get into his cab. But I tell you, that part of the town they went to is really sketchy. And I don't blame them for switching hotels too, because I wouldn't want to stay in that one right near a creepy area of town anyways either. Man, that's disturbing.
Back in early 2016, I was 23 and living in this quiet little spot up in northern New Mexico. That weekend, I'd driven solo up to Boulder, Colorado to see a friend and unwind a bit. It's a long drive, but I'd done it a bunch of times before, so the distance didn't bother me much. Plus, the desert landscape always made for a scenic ride. Things were smooth the whole way back until I stopped in a town called Alamosa to grab gas. That's the last real town before you're back in no man's land for almost 90 miles, with nothing around but dirt roads, scattered trailers, and high desert terrain. It was just getting dark when I pulled out of the gas station, and almost immediately, I noticed this older blue sedan pull out too and end up behind me on the highway. I didn't think much of it at first, but after a few minutes I realized they were riding way too close for comfort. I figured maybe they were in a hurry and would pass me soon, but they didn't. I sped up a bit, and so did they. I slowed down, and they slowed down. It was creepy how perfectly in sync they were with my speed, and for a second, I wondered if it might be a cop waiting to catch me slipping. So I decided to pull off at this little convenience store in Antonito, thinking, okay, if it's a cop, they'll stop and talk to me now. The car pulled over too, parked right behind me, but nobody got out. I sat there, completely still, trying to act like I wasn't about to have a panic attack. After a few minutes of silence and no movement from them, I decided to hit the road again, hoping maybe they'd get bored. But nope. They pulled out right behind me, still tailing me like it was a game. I had about an hour left to go, and the highway was just getting darker and lonelier. By the time I crossed into New Mexico, any hope I had that this was just some harmless misunderstanding was gone. My gut told me loud and clear, this was not okay. The worst part? My phone was practically useless. It was one of those older iPhones that only worked when connected to Wi-Fi, and I was deep in an area known for being sketchy, especially out on the Taos Mesa. People talk about weird stuff happening out there. Lights in the sky, people going missing, you name it. And now I was being followed through it, with no way to call for help. I was so shaken up that I totally missed the turn that led to the long dirt road home. Luckily, I remembered this little scenic rest area off the highway that was usually lit up and had a few people around. So I pulled in, hoping this car would either keep driving or finally stop. And of course, they pulled in right behind me. At this point, I was scared, but also seriously pissed. So I decided to just walk up to the driver and figure out what the hell was going on. And when the window rolled down, I was totally thrown. Behind the wheel was this average-looking middle-aged woman. I don't know what I was expecting, but it sure wasn't that. I asked her why she'd been following me for nearly 90 miles, and she gave me this weird excuse about thinking I was her daughter. I just stared at her like, lady what? My car had plates from a different state, was covered in bright, weird bumper stickers, and looked nothing like something you'd mistake for your kids. Also, wouldn't you call your daughter if you were really that confused? None of it made sense, and honestly, the more she talked, the creepier it felt. I chewed her out and drove off again, thinking that would finally be the end of it. But when I turned off onto the dirt road that leads to my house, she turned in too. I slammed the brakes, jumped out, and told her very clearly that this wasn't a public road. There was no other way out, and it was dangerous to get lost out here in the dark. She just kept apologizing in that same soft tone. But when I got back in my car and started driving again, she kept following me. I was so close to home at that point, and I just kept hoping my boyfriend would be there. As soon as I pulled into the driveway, she pulled in too, parked, and got out of her car. She started walking toward me, asking if she could crash at our place for the night, because she was too tired to keep driving. I started yelling at her to leave, and right as the noise picked up, my boyfriend came out onto the porch. The second she saw him, she stopped in her tracks, turned around, and basically sprinted back to her car. She took off without saying another word, and we never saw her again. To this day, I have no idea what her real motive was, or if someone else was hiding in the back seat of that car. I just know she followed me for nearly 90 miles through isolated roads, lied straight to my face, and only bailed when another adult showed up.
Yeah, oh yeah, that would make me pissed too if somebody just kept on following you. But she wanted to see where you lived at and then give you the whole "can I stay here because I'm tired" nonsense just so she can act like she wants to crash there and then probably steal some stuff from you and leave. But thank God her boyfriend walked up on the porch to see what in the world was going on. And that lady saw him. She said, "Nah, I'm leaving this one alone, this couple alone," and took off. But yeah, I would get furious as well that she said, "Oh, I thought you were my kid." No. If you're looking for your child, call them, not keep following some car that you think is theirs. But anyway, I'm just glad that she got out of their driveway and left. And they didn't have to bother with her no more. Or don't have to be bothered by her no more.
Whatever she was up to, it wasn't good. All right, so this happened not too long ago. April 4th, 2022, to be exact. My friend and I had just finished up an amazing night in Columbus, Ohio, after seeing Matt Maltese live, and we were heading back home to Kentucky. About 20 or 30 minutes into the drive, we realized we hadn't eaten much since earlier in the evening, so we pulled off the highway to stop at this random gas station, grab some snacks, and hit the restroom. Everything was pretty standard: chips, drinks, a bathroom break, and we got back in the car ready to just zone out and drive home. But when I looked down at my GPS, I noticed it had changed our route from the usual interstate to some back highway I didn't recognize. Now, it was already around midnight, and we were both wiped, so I didn't question it too much. I figured maybe there was traffic or an accident, and I just wanted to get home. As soon as we turned onto the new route, though, things started to feel off. There were no streetlights, no other cars, no businesses or houses, just open fields as far as you could see. The gas station we just left seemed to be the last trace of civilization, and even the road ahead looked like something out of a horror movie. After about 5 or 6 miles of driving through this eerie emptiness, the GPS told me to make a right onto some tiny road that barely looked like it was used. No painted lines, no street name signs, and just a couple of scattered houses along the way, though none of them looked like anyone had lived in them for years. The vibes were seriously off. I made a joke to my friend, something like, "This feels like where you'd run into an SW, using just the abbreviation. If you know, you know." He immediately shot back with, "Dude, don't even say that," and laughed. But it didn't really ease the tension. Then the GPS announced there was a railroad crossing coming up, so I started watching for the tracks. But we didn't see them until they were literally right in front of us. Just rusty metal and graffiti-covered train cars sitting there in complete silence. There were no flashing lights, no gate arms, not even a single sound. The thing looked abandoned, like it hadn't moved in years. My headlights barely lit it up, but the little I saw was enough to make both of us freeze. That's when my friend said my name really quietly, like he was trying not to freak me out. But we were already both freaking out. It felt like we weren't supposed to be there, like we had slipped into a place that wasn't real. There was no way to go forward, and there definitely wasn't a path around. So I threw the car in reverse, spun around through the grass, and floored it back down the highway, doing like 80 until we reached the gas station we'd stopped at earlier. Once we got there and finally started to breathe again, we just sat in silence for a few minutes, trying to make sense of what just happened. We pulled up the GPS again, and just like that, it rerouted back to the interstate, like nothing ever happened. No sign of that sketchy back road, no mention of a railroad crossing, no reason for why we were ever taken that way. And the thing is, that train wasn't just broken down recently. The wheels were corroded. The whole thing looked like it had been rusting in that spot for years. Why would the GPS send us to a dead end like that? The more I think about it, the more it messes with me. From the second we left that gas station to the moment we came back, it all felt fake. Like we weren't really there, or we were somewhere else entirely. It didn't feel like a normal detour or a bad route. It felt wrong. Maybe it was just late night paranoia, or maybe it was something else entirely. But I swear I've never felt that kind of dread before.
I don't know what to tell you about that because I was just thinking it might have been a smart computer hacker that probably messed up the GPS, but I think that theory is out the window. So I just figured that the GPS probably messed up on the routes. But it's so weird that when they go back to the gas station, it reroutes back to where they were going originally. You just don't know what technology would do nowadays, I guess. Thank God they just decided to turn back around and find their way back to where they were going instead of being stuck driving in like a crazy part of town where old railroad cars are staying at that were graffitied. That's a perfect place for criminals to hide and wait for somebody to come around. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on post notifications for more Midnight Tales content like this. This has been another successful installment of the Tin Man Explorer channel. I'm your host, Jeffrey Tin Man Taylor, and that's a wrap, and that's a day.